guys, and welcome back to Love, Life, and College. This is your host, Lover Fifa, with my best friend Jenny Paul here to talk about vocational calling. So, Jenny, when did you feel like you had a really good sense of your vocational calling?
I am really glad you asked this question, Love. And by the way, thank you for inviting me on your talk show. It's such an honor to be here. So, the moment I really realized and had a full sense of my vocational calling was during my freshman year of college at Baylor. I took a class my second semester, and it was called Vocational Leadership, and it dealt with understanding your calling and what that meant for the work you were supposed to do later in life. So one of the projects for this class was to go on some type of retreat or do some type of work that was related to what you wanted to do later in life to have a better understanding of what God was calling you to do. What I chose to do was a silent retreat, and this took place Easter weekend. I remained here at Baylor University while most people went to their houses, so it was really quiet. And I decided that I wanted to pray and meditate and focus on the Word of God and look upon Him to see what my vocational calling was and what He wanted me to do. So before I began my spiritual retreat, I decided that I wanted to ask a question, to pose a question, and kind of base my whole retreat around that. And my question was, is becoming a physician my calling? Essentially, that's what I thought I truly needed to know, but that's not what God had in mind. So as I asked this question, and I had this question in the forefront of my mind, I decided that I wanted to read the Gospel of Luke. And it was kind of a random, I don't know why I picked it, honestly. I just realized I wanted to pick a gospel, and I realized I hadn't really read that one in a while. So I went to that, and one of the first things that many people have in Bibles is a brief history. A brief history of the author of the gospel and what he did and what time frame. And the first thing I read, before I even started reading the Bible, the first thing I read was this: Luke, a physician, writes with compassion and warmth of a family doctor as he carefully documents the perfect humanity of the Son of Man, Jesus Christ. So I was honestly kind of shocked when I read this, because first of all, I never knew that he was a physician. In all of my years, I've never come across that fact. And second of all, I was just completely awed by the fact that the first book, the book I had chosen to read, was completely random, but it was something that pertained to me in such a way that the person who was the author of the book was a physician himself. And that in itself kind of answered that question for me, yes, God is telling me, yeah, this is your calling, don't doubt it. And when I did that, I was like, okay, well, I guess I know what my calling is. I guess I don't have to go on this retreat anymore. But it was still a project, still great. So I figured, I'll just read the book as I had originally planned. And as I was reading the book of Luke, something that kept reoccurring, a major theme, was that it was important to have faith and to stop worrying. And every person in the stories in the Bible, every single person I noticed had a tendency to worry, had a tendency to lack faith. For example, one story that really struck out to me was the story about Martha and Mary, and how Martha had invited Jesus to come to her home, and she wanted to host him and certain other people. And she was really stressed out by being a host. She was worried, and she was constantly she wasn't able to enjoy God's presence. Rather, she was just constantly worried. And because of that, she even went up to Jesus and she was like, hey, my sister isn't helping me, isn't that wrong? And Jesus himself said, why are you worried? Martha, Martha, why are you worried? You should be like Mary, who found what she really needed and focused on that. And Mary was able to find happiness, not in worrying about things, but spending time with God. That's where she found her true happiness. And I realized that did speak to me, because I think I'm constantly worried about my calling and worried about whether or not I was gonna, I would make it as a physician, or I would make it as in the medical field, anything. I would just make it. It was the thing that I was worried about. Not whether or not it was my true calling, but whether or not I would be able to live up to what God has called me to do. Because I always had this fear that if I didn't, I would fail God. And I think that's always been in the back of my mind, just failing Him, failing myself, failing my family. That's always there. And so when I read, don't worry, when I read that God was telling me don't worry, I think that gave me a sense of peace. And after reading this stuff, I started reflecting on my past freshman year at Baylor and how much God had helped me through the times when I felt lonely, when I felt in despair, when I felt scared. God was always there to hold my hand and help me. And if He was able